Alright, I think it's the moment of truth. Time to start the car. It's actually been little over a year since I started working on it to get it running, and at that time I thought it would take me a month. So much for my planning. Hopefully I've got everything connected. I'm not sure 100% on the timing, but we can tune that. This is my boost control solenoid. So the plumbing on it, it's getting vacuum and boost from the back of the intake manifold. Comes into the solenoid through port number 2, out through port number 3, which is controlled by the boost controller, and then into the wastegate. So instead of the manual boost controllers that we're used to, this one will actually pulse the solenoid open and closed, and that'll control the boost to keep it right at the setting you want. It's something new I haven't tried, but I'm really looking forward to that. Plumbing, I guess I have a port that I have to plug off still, and I think that should do it. I'll be ready to at least start it. Won't be able to drive it, but I'll be able to start it. Key on. So that's the boost controller you hear. And you can see the water pumps going through its cycles. So when this is on solid, the pump is on solid. When the fan spins, the radiator fan spins. So right now it's in pulse mode, so it's just pulsing the water pump, small increments. This is to help if you're running the car to get the heater core up to temperature. Right now it's on solid again. Shows your voltage, the coolant temperature. On the dash, oil pressure, fuel pressure, and exhaust temperature. This is the boost control settings, but I'm not going to play with to start with. And I did not see a boost. So there was 60 psi in the accumulator, and that should have fed back through, but I don't see anything coming up. Right. Fuel pressure. There it goes. So I've got to adjust fuel pressure. I'll set that at 45 psi. So we got fuel pressure. Let's give it a crank. And we got nothing. When I turned the key, I got nothing. No clicks or anything. And I got to thinking that years ago I had installed a clutch switch to make sure that the car doesn't get started if the clutch is not depressed. So you always have to have the clutch pressed in. Back in the 80s, believe it or not, these cars did not have a clutch switch. So if you had the clutch out like normal when you're driving it and had it in gear, you could start the car and it would drive right away on you. And it's hard to believe that they didn't put the clutch switch in, but that's the way it worked. So anyway, what my problem was is in this wiring harness coming out of your SMEC and all, there's a brown and yellow wire and that is grounded to the top of the transmission. And I had it disconnected because I had it running to the switch on my clutch. So I added this clutch switch, and what it does is it's just like a brake switch. When you push the pedal in, it activates across, so it shorts across the switch, so it'll let your SMEC see ground. So the engine controller will see ground. So these are my wiring. I just didn't have the wires connected all the way through. So that was my problem. So if you're looking to add that, you just need a pedal switch of some kind. And this brown yellow wire is normally grounded on your transmission somewhere. And I can't remember where they originally grounded it, to be honest. But it went to one of the bolts on here. This is actually your reverse lights, this switch, the one that goes into the top of the shifter. So when you go to reverse, it shorts out and turns on your backup lights. So that is not the same thing. This wire, brown yellow, is going to be grounded somewhere on top of the tranny, and then it runs back to your engine controller, whatever type of control you have, whether it's here or on the door pillar on the passenger side. So if your car doesn't do anything when you try to start it, just keep in mind that might be it. All I did was temporarily grounded it. But one thing I wanted to show was the oil accumulator. If you go to start the car, I have my solenoid wired to the battery circuit. So if I energize it, you can see that I have instant oil pressure before I start. It doesn't matter if I turn it off or not. It's already got the, well, I guess it does. If I turn it off, it loses its pressure. So start. Serpentine belts lined up. I gotta find what that stumble is. One thing is my air-fuel ratio is not coming up. After starting the car a couple times, the key went dead, and the engine shut off normally, and then I went to restart it and I had nothing on the key. So this is a case where if you're going to rear mount your battery, make sure you fuse your battery, because what I've got is a blown fuse. This setup, which I'm not happy with, to be honest, has two fuses. One's a spare and one's active. And this one is blown. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's shot. So something blew that fuse. Now whether the fuse was rated too low or what, I've got to dig into that a little bit more. Like, it's been so long that I've had that I couldn't tell you what the rating is. My plan is to go to something like this, which is a circuit breaker. This one's rated for 120 amps. You can pop it, reset it, pop it. So this one's much better than this design. I did like this one because it had a spare fuse. So I figure if you ever blew one, you have a spare maybe to get you back home. But chances are if you blow one, you're going to blow two. So a circuit breaker is the way to go. Rate this for whatever your alternator's rated. This is probably the best way to do it. Okay, some people might ask about this clutch switch, and it is a 3-pole switch, I believe you'd call it. But essentially, it's got 6 wires coming out of it. And the reason for that is you've got a pair of wires that go to the start circuit, so that you have to have the clutch pushed in for the starter to engage. And you've also got a pair of wires that go to the cruise control. So if you don't have cruise control, you don't need it. But obviously, if you've got a cruise control, you're driving down the highway and you push the clutch in, you don't want the engine to rev, so that would disconnect the cruise control. Third set, I'm not sure what that does. I can't remember, but I'm sure it tells the SMEC something. But that's why you need a switch that has more than one function if you've got the cruise control. The brake switch, you can't see it, but it's up above this plate. I had to relocate it. It was down here. Suppose I could put it back here again, because when you push the clutch in. So I guess I will be doing that probably, just so you can access it if you ever had to. But that's also one of the things that keeps your pedal from pulling out of the master cylinder, is to have a brake switch in the way when you have the clutch, you have your brake pedal come back. So just a couple things to keep in mind. The brake also has a multi-function for the stoplights and the cruise control. So this is one off a 90s type Daytona, I believe I got it from. Can't remember, but they're all probably going to be the same. All the K cars would have that. But it's a nice thing to have, unless it goes wrong. If you have a problem with it, you need to be able to jumper it out so that you can just take your ground wire and jumper it to the proper wire. I have to go back through and figure out which wires go to which. But well, I have sad news. I started it and I was getting a pulsing engine where it would try to kick out on me every 5 seconds or so. But it would keep running, and it'd run for about a minute and then it would stall out and fire right back up again. What started to happen was I was getting a knock, either out of 2 or 3. I'm kind of leaning towards 3. I pulled the plugs, everything's sooty, like it's retarded. Couldn't really get the timing to adjust properly. It was still doing that pulsing thing. And after probably 10 minutes of playing with this, all of a sudden it started to knock. And it's gotten to where it's knocking big time, like the piston's trying to come out of the head. I had hoped that maybe there was a misfire where it was sparking at the wrong time and detonating in one of the cylinders. Unfortunately, I just changed the cap, rotor, wires, and she's doing the same thing to me, and the knock is getting worse. So I'm done trying to start the engine. So where does this put me at this point? I've got to definitely yank the head and everything out of the top of the engine. So I'll pull the head, intake manifold, turbo, all as one assembly. Find out which cylinder is giving me the problem, and then I'll tear the bottom out of it and see if it's a rod loose or what's going on. But you remember one of the videos I went through the engine, tightened everything up. Not sure what's going on, but definitely not happy at this point. I was at the point where I was getting ready to finish the brakes, get it off the lift, and give it a try. So Now we're set back who knows how long. On the plus side, serpentine belt's working well. So that setup is proven out. Power steering's not leaking. So there are some wins, but overall, with the engine knocking like this, she may be toast. We'll see. At this point, I've started tearing the hardware off the head so I can get the head out of this. I'm not going to show a live video on how to do it because it's just too many positions. You're moving back and forth constantly trying to work on things and get access. So I'll show a little bit. I started to take the serpentine bracket off, pulled timing belt, plugs, distributor. Right now I get to leave the oil cooler or oil accumulator lines on. I had put distilled water in the system, the cooling system, so I've flushed all that through. I actually put air pressure on the let's see, which line did I use? I put it on this line that went into the turbo and also the one that came out of the back of the head. So I purged all the water that was in the engine that I could get out through the bottom radiator hose. So that's pretty much flushed all the coolant. I've started, as you can see, ripping all the piping off, which is actually pretty easy. I like the way all that came apart. So I guess all my time and energy wasn't wasted making sure things were accessible. Right now I'm ready to take a deep dive under the block or under the bottom, pull off this coolant line and then get the oil line off the turbo, the main exiting oil line. Got to do some wiring. Started to take the hoses off and I realized that I should have plumbed a fitting to this side of the intake so that I could take the fuel line that goes to both ends of the fuel rail and just had a hard fitting here so I could just disconnect, because that line comes all the way up over to the bottom of the, or I think it comes to this one, on the fuel regulator. So that's a lot of work. So I'm rethinking my fuel return line, so I'll put a fitting here probably, because if you have to pull it, and if you don't have access to it, you will have to pull it probably. And then I'll need to put a quick disconnect onto this harness that comes in for all the injectors. I actually thought I had one on there. Oh, I do, right there. Oh. Yep, there's a connector right there. I forgot about that. That's a factory connector. So that problem solved. This one is for the temperature sensor on the air temp. I should be able to just pull that and feed it back out, so that won't be bad. And then I got to get the oxygen sensor unplugged from the back of the exhaust manifold and get the exhaust pipe off, and then I should be able to yank this. So hopefully tonight I'll have some answers. Alright, before I yank the head, I thought I would show how I've hooked up my crane to lift it. Kind of grab the center point. Got a bracket on the back. I'm trying to square everything up so that I'm getting towards the center of the load. But the turbo is still attached. The intake obviously. Fortunately my serpentine belt stays with the block. It doesn't go up into the head area. That was one of the reasons I did it that way, was if I had to pull ahead I don't have to unbolt my brackets. So that's how I'm going to lift it. And we'll see what's under. So here's where we're at. Heads off. First look underneath. So I don't see any signs of metal to metal. So that tells me my knocking is coming out of the crank, out of the rods. But at least the head looks good. Well, I pulled the oil pan off. got to look at the bottom end, and one thing I noticed, there's a little bit of rod slop, and you can take the nuts off with your fingers. So obviously I never torqued the rod bolts. Every one of the rods are loose. Crank bolts are tight. I do remember tightening the crank bolts, but every one of the rod bolts came loose. So I'm going to pull the bearings out of them, replace the bearings obviously. First I'll check the crank and make sure that's not damaged, but I don't think it is because I didn't run it long enough. And once I heard the knocking, I probably got about a minute or two of just idle on it. So I'm going to say that if you want an engine rebuilt, don't give it to me, because obviously I can't be counted on to do it right. Even though I've rebuilt half a dozen of them in my life, never had a problem with any of them until now. It's a good reminder, is all these videos are for, is to save you from doing the same things I do wrong, is don't get distracted when you're doing work. And I know the problem with this is that I was worrying about the videos that I was doing and trying to take those and do the work, and you get working and you have to go get tools and things, and I got distracted by videos. I know that's what it was. And it reminds me of back in the days when I was rock climbing. There was a French woman who was the best free climber in the world, and she got talking to a reporter while she was getting her harness on and forgot to clip in and went up the rock and fell off and died. So it happens to the best. So you're working on something, don't video it unless you're just going to let the camera run and not worry about it, because this is what happens when you get distracted from things. Let it be a lesson.